Hello and welcome to another video. I hope you're doing fantastic today. Today we're back with another top 10 video. We're going over my top 10 fantasy books. Now there are a few caveats. These are not exactly my top 10 ranking, as if there was, we'd have multiple books from the same series and not as much diversity. So what I wanted to do was give you 10 epic books from 10 different series that all had an impact on my reading. So some of these books don't sit in my top 10, but they are all incredible books from series that have had impacts on me and my fantasy reading journey, and that I think are worth recommending to you guys. So coming in at books 10 through 8, we have 3 books from 3 series that I read growing up that helped to ignite my love for fantasy and grow my interest in the genre. So at number 10, we have The Burning Bridge by John Flanagan. The Burning Bridge is book 2 of John Flanagan's Ranger's Apprentice series, which is a middle grade fantasy series. This is the original book series that got me reading when I was in primary school. My sisters were all big readers growing up, reading things like Harry Potter and the Tomorrow Pierce series, but I had never gotten to reading as a kid, and my mum was just trying desperately to get me interested. So she took me to this bookstore when we were on holidays. I can remember exactly where the bookstore was, and she was like, "Please pick a book, Dylan." So I went out there, and the Ranger's Apprentice book, The Ruins of Gorland, just caught my eye. And I read it in about 2 days. It's just the perfect middle grade series. So The Ranger's Apprentice is about our lead character, Will. He lives in a medieval Europe sort of times. And he is based in a fiefdom in what would have been medieval England, but it's called Arundel in this book. And Will is a ward of the fief. He grows up under the Baron's care as an orphan. And when Will comes of age to start providing a service for this Baron that has provided for him, he needs to go into something to start providing value. He needs to be a butcher or a soldier. He needs to go into something. He gets called up to be in the Rangers Corps. Now, the Rangers are a select group of people that have a very select skill service that would kind of relate to being spies, like medieval spies. They work directly for the king. They keep much to themselves. They they look after information and protecting borders. They're not so much in the day-to-day like policing of the country, but more so just protecting the country from outside threats. And when there's something big going on, they're usually in the center of it with their information and their ability to get in and out of situations very well. They can blend into backgrounds, and they are very handy with a bow, so they can do quite a bit of damage from a distance. And they're typically more smaller framed individuals and not the big bulky soldiers from the stories. So growing up as a kid, these novels were just so interesting to be able to dive into this world where, as a smaller kid, I was able to see how just with hard work and dedication, you can really do a lot. You don't have to be the perfect knight in shining armor to still do well and still be of value. And these series were just so much fun. And the reason I put The Burning Bridge, book 2 of the series, as the book I want to tell you guys about is because on the same holiday I got book 1, we went back to that bookstore and I got book 2. And on the way home, Mum was driving the car. I was reading the last few pages of the book, and something was happening that I just couldn't believe it. I was still invested in these character stories, and something bad was happening that was going to set up the next few books. I didn't have the next few books, and I knew that once I ran out of pages, I wasn't going to get the ending I want. I was in tears. I was bawling up, and my mum was having to deal with that while she was driving. I was crying about these characters, and I think for an author to get me into reading, to get me crying in the car that much over fantastical books, you have to check out John Flanagan if you are looking at getting a younger reader into reading and fantasy. He has many series out now, but The Ranger's Apprentice is still incredible. Okay, I may have rambled about that for too long, but coming in at number 9, we have Aragon, book 1 of the Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. Now, I think this series got a lot of people my age and a bit older really into fantasy. It brings all the fun world building aspects of classic fantasy into a more modern YA setting. It's really, if you haven't read The Inheritance Cycle yet, It's really like a fantasy version of Star Wars, where we've got our hero's journey, our farm boy to hero, our rebellion fighting back against an empire. And it's just got so many fun things in it, so many great characters, so many fun world building aspects that if you hadn't read fantasy before, were super new and fun to explore. So I highly recommend that if you're a younger reader between 12 and 18, that could definitely be a series you may want to be interested in and checking out. This is a series that I've returned to many times, and as you notice, I don't have the physical copies on me now because my sisters have them, because we just have read these books so many times. And I found Aragon to just be such a fun character to hang out with that he definitely had to make this list. Now, coming at number 8, we have the last series that I read when I was younger before I kind of went off reading fantasy for a little bit. So, coming in at book 8, we have The Painted Man by Peter V. Brett. This is book 1 of the Demon Cycle. And this is one of the best book 1s of a series you will read. There's a lot of people that don't like where the Demon Cycle ended up in the last book. I personally had a great time with the whole series and only had a couple issues of the last book, and it's probably one of my favorite series of all time. But The Painted Man itself is an absolute masterpiece of fantasy. And book 1 definitely had me hooked reading this younger because the characters were aged back in that book. And there was time jumps in the book that really helped to set up the series. The Painted Man is a really expansive series with a large world that takes place over a massive continent. And the core things the series is built around is when the sun goes down, demons rise up through the ground and they own the night. If you aren't hidden behind your wards at night, demons are going to come and they are going to kill you and cause havoc. So the world that we've got, because people can't be out at night, is very much secluded. We have big cities placed all over the continent which have big wards and people are able to stay safe and thrive. And then we have small country towns, very scarcely placed, constantly just fighting to have enough population because demons burn their buildings down and whenever and cause havoc. Even though the wards are there, they're just not always protective. But something that our main character does in book 1 causes something to happen where people can now start to fight back against the demons. They can start to try to take control of the night. And as you could imagine, that if people are now going out at night more or they're able to move around easier, there's now going to be conflicts between the countries that were once separated due to that issue. So now we get a massive conflict between multiple countries whilst we still have this conflict with the demons. And if that doesn't intrigue you like you would be with Game of Thrones, I don't know what you're thinking about. Book 1 just sets up the book series so well. We get to see our lead characters age about 10 years and see them become the people they need to be leaders and people that take control during this series. And thinking about it, I really want to go back and read this series at the moment. It was a lot of fun, and I'm so happy that I again found that book at the same bookstore I found The Ranger's Apprentice at after having a few years off reading fantasy. Now, coming in at number 7, we have the book that reignited my love for fantasy as an adult, and it's the whole reason I started making videos like this. And that is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. A year and a half ago, I was walking through a bookstore picking out what book I was going to read next. At this stage, I was reading a lot of nonfiction, but I saw this cover and I've always had a love for fantasy. I look at that cover, like that's stunning. I had to get my hands on it and I flew through that in a week, which for me, I hadn't done since Game of Thrones, which I read in about 2018. So the things that made me fall in love with The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne from his Bloodsworn saga were the Viking setting. I absolutely loved the Norse setting with Vikings and their small war bands just going around the country. I loved the setting with the gods that were reawakening. The world is kind of set 300 years after like Ragnarok, after the gods fall, and the gods are reawakening and getting involved in the world. And the pacing in John Gwynne's books is super fast, so you're just constantly hooked and you always want to see what's on the next page. And the thing John Gwynne does best is his battles and his action, and you just feel like you were part of the Viking war band, just absolutely just fighting people and having a grand old time afterwards. sharing some mead with your friends. So it's definitely a book series I'm so happy I came across. Then after putting down The Shadow of the Gods, I needed more. I had to read more fantasy. So I went online and I Googled, where do I start with fantasy? What do I read next? And I think you'll know what this book is. Mistborn: The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. If you go online, this is one of the most recommended books for people getting into fantasy, and I can tell you why. This book is super approachable for readers. The prose that Brandon Sanderson uses is nice and simple, so you can easily understand what's going on in his books. You can immerse yourself in his worlds, which are massively expansive and super creative and well thought out. And his worlds are just so unique. You're just so fascinated by the worlds he can build. The characters are likable and you want to hang out with them. And the plots are so intriguing, you just have to find out what's on the next page. Mistborn here is set in a world where this Lord Ruler has been ruling for the last 1,000 years. Ash literally rains from the skies, and our main character Vin, who has been hanging out with the criminal underbelly of society, comes across someone who is setting up a heist to take down the Lord Ruler. And if that doesn't hook you in already, you don't like the heist themes, the world building, the plot, I don't know what's not to love about this series. This series has some of the best twists where you're just flipping over the pages and you're like, oh my goodness, what just happened? This is another book I read in a week, and I just had to tell people about it. I got my friends to read it, my family to read it. I'm surprised I actually have it on my shelf for once. I'm about to go and give it to another person to read tonight. So lucky I started filming this video now. And if you haven't read Brandon Sanderson already, he plans out his book so well that he is able to do incredible twists. His plots are so intriguing and they go in a good direction. He actually knows where his books are going to end, so he can set that up through or out his whole books. His world building's incredible and his magic systems are so much fun. Then, coming at number 5, we have my most recent read, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I didn't realize how much I could love spending time with different characters until I read this book. The character work in The Blade Itself is the best characters I've come across in any books I've read. The characters he's picked, in having one character named Glocta, where he was a soldier who was tortured for 2 years, come back to now be a torturer. Just excellently done. Just so enjoyable. One of my favorite characters to read is Giselle. He is a spoiled brat, but you just want him to make a good decision and treat people well. And he never does, but you're constantly just wanting him to do the right thing. And the way Joe Abercrombie is able to get you to cheer for the characters, no matter how bad of people they are, no matter how many times they make the wrong decisions, is fantastic. This series is setting up to be something fantastic, and I can't wait to find out more about the series. And if you haven't read the first lore yet, you most likely have, but if you haven't, you have to check it out. Characters are just impeccable, so enjoyable, just dark humor, it's gritty. I love it. And coming at number 4, we have a tie. 2 books by one of my favorite authors of all time, and I just couldn't pick one. So we've got God's Grave by J. Kristoff, Book 2 of the Nevernight Chronicles, and Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. 2 impeccable books from 2 impeccable series. The Nevernight Chronicles is a trilogy, and Empire of the Vampire will be 2, but it's currently just 1 book of 3. Book 2 will be coming out in March. Now, the reason I am such a big fan of Nevernight, J. Kristoff, and God's Grave is because J. Kristoff just talks to my inner scene kid as a teenager. As a teenager, I was massively into the metal scene and, just edgy emo music. You can probably tell by the Nirvana hat and the Led Zeppelin shirt. But Jay Kristoff just comes from the same sort of vibe as me, and his books definitely just scratch that itch that I wanted to see some darker, edgier books. And with the Nevernight Chronicles and God's Grave, this is our revenge story. In book 1, we get an assassin school with just teenagers just killing each other and going crazy, and Mia Corvere, a main character, learning the skills she needs to take down her revenge. In God's Grave, my favorite book in the series. We get the same, but in a gladiator scene. So now Mia's going through the gladiatorial circuit and learning even more skills to become an even better killer to set up the last book, Dark Dawn, where she can take out her all-out revenge. Now, J. Kristoff is a controversial author because apparently his prose is too purple. I don't know what that means. Yes, he uses funny words and his characters talk differently, but it just feels like his characters are out of like a French or Italian world. This series gives you very much dark Gothic Roman vibes, which I hadn't come across before and I loved. And getting gladiators in fantasy, getting Mia just gone crazy, just fighting. Like, it's just so much enjoyment I got from this series. It's dark, it's gritty, it's revenge, it's humor, it's gladiators, it's Rome, it's fantasy. I just love it. Now, Empire of the Vampire, I don't have a copy on me, but it was a lot of fun. There's dark, edgy vibes back still. We got the fun prose that really immerses you in the world. And we got my first story with vampires since reading The Witcher. And I loved it. We're in a world where the sun no longer fully rises, so now vampires can walk during the day. They have now built their own empire, and there are fewer and fewer humans alive every single day. But humanity still has a hope. There's a religious sect doing everything they can to stop the vampires from taking over. Now, our character, Gabriel de Leon, is from this sect. He is someone who has built his life around fighting to stop the vampires and to figure out why the sun went away and how to bring it back. Now, in the book, Gabriel's a bit fallen from grace. He's not the same person he used to be, and he has now found himself caught by the vampires. And in this book, we are hearing Gabriel tell his story. Gabriel is catching us up to current events by recounting the events that led to him being caught by the vampires. We're getting to see his life story, and it is very well done. We get lots of different time jumps and get to see J. Kristoff build this world out, and it's a great time. If you haven't read The Empire of the Vampire already, I highly recommend you check it out. Now, coming in at number 3.5, we have A War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill. Now, the reason I've had to put this at 3.5 is because I started filming this video a few days ago, and when I was doing the editing to get up to where I was up to now and doing the last 3 books, I realized I'd forgotten a series and I just couldn't leave their books out. So I've had to push this one back just a little bit. So Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill is book 3 of his Bound and the Broken series. And this is my current favorite series at the moment. Basically, if you haven't read the Bound and the Broken yet, it's if Eragon was written by John Gwynne and George R.R. Martin. So it's that basic plot of farm boy to hero, where we used to have an ancient guild of dragon riders that protected the lands until someone turned on them and brought that empire to ashes, and now a dark empire rules with an evil emperor. So The Bound and the Broken takes place 400 years after the fall of that previous empire where the Dragon Riders ruled. So if you want to get started with The Bound and the Broken, you can either read The Fall, which is a very short novella that takes place in that battle 400 years before the events of The Bound and the Broken, where the Dragon Riders turn on each other. So it's just 4 chapters of battle. We get 4 separate POVs of certain characters in that time period when things were getting chaotic. And we get to see some of those characters show up in the main series of The Bound and the Broken. And you can also start the series with Of Blood and Fire, which is the first novel of the series. And Of Blood and Fire would be very similar to Eragon, book 1 of the Inheritance Cycle, where our lead character from the farmland discovers a dragon egg, which hatches for him, and gets swept up into this world and all the politics with the rebellion trying to build up and fight back in to bring down the empire. There's lots of other rebel guilds going on, and there's lots of different sides to this conflict, and there's morally grey characters. It's not black and white. If you haven't checked out the series already, you definitely have to check it out. And the reason Of War and Ruin is my favourite book of this series is because every book, every main novel released around The Bound and the Broken, the series grows in scope, in storyline, in POVs, and just gets more and more epic. The battle scenes are incredible. So with the scope of things in Of War and Ruin, we get incredible twists, we get incredible characters introduced, and the plot is just grown to a massive scale of just so much going on, and it's just so enjoyable getting to see everyone's perspectives from all these different sides of the conflict over the entire continent. Um, Dragons, battles, great characters, great world building, elves, dwarves, all the great things from classic fantasy done in a modern voice. I love this series so much, and I cannot wait for it to be finished. If you haven't read The Bound and the Broken yet, there's currently 3 novellas out, there's 3 main novels, and the book 4 is on the way this year. Ryan's doing his best to get it out before Brandon Sanderson releases book 5 of the Stormlight Archive, so this series should be coming out soon. So you should start reading it now so you can join in on the action of book 4 when it comes out later this year. Now, it was very hard for me to rank these next books, and I honestly don't know which way I'm going to rank them now. Just turning around and looking at my shelf, I can see all 3 of them. I'm not sure how I'm going to pick which one. So the 3 last books that we have to mention, we have one completed series. So I'm going to leave that for number 1 because I know everyone loves a completed series and might not want to hear too much about an incompleted series. But I'm going to tell you about the worst incompleted series first. So coming at number 3 on this list, we have A Song of Ice and Fire book. I read these books all back to back to back a few years ago, so they feel just like one book in my head. And I've seen the series so many times that the whole show, the whole series, the whole books all blends together so much that I can't pick a single book. But if you haven't read A Song of Ice and Fire, if you haven't watched A Game of Thrones, I don't know if you like fantasy, because George R. R. Martin is the best world builder. Yes, you can say whatever you want about Lord of the Rings. I agree with you. Tolkien's incredible. He's iconic. But I just feel like Westeros is a place that exists. The way that George R. R. Martin builds his history. Yes, I know Tolkien's got tons of history books. But the way George R. R. Martin does it with his Fire and Blood books and the amount of filling out he does in his worlds with his characters and their families' pasts and just the scope of the world, I just feel like Westeros is more alive in my head than any other fantasy world I've read. The characters, you saw how much I love the characters in the first lore. I have that same level of love for the characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. The character work's incredible. The prose is just lovely. It just puts you right in the setting and the environment that you need to be in to bring the world alive. And yeah, it's so popular for a reason. Some people love to hate on A Song of Ice and Fire. Those people are just morons. This series is incredible. It doesn't need to be finished for me to love it. I love those books that we got. So coming at number 2, but also pretty much is number 1. It's an incredible book. Like, these are so hard to rank. Like, how do you put one above the other? It's Words of Radiance, book 2 of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. And if you're here watching this video on YouTube, hearing someone talk about fantasy, and you haven't read the Stormlight Archive yet, I question what you're doing, because this series is just the best of every aspect of fantasy. If you want to see how someone can write a plot, Brandon Sanderson. He plans out his books so far in advance that he knows everything that's going to happen in this book, so he can set little Easter eggs all the way throughout the book that just set up great finishings at the end. His foretelling, his foreshadowing, the way he builds his plot and his stories is just top notch, the best in fantasy. The characters in the Stormlight Archive are Brandon Sanderson's best characters he's ever done, and some of the traumas that his characters go through will bring you to tears. Brandon's world building is the most creative and well thought out there. So the type of worlds you get thrown into are just so creative. It's so fun to just live and exist in his worlds for a little bit to escape reality. And the writing style is just so easily accessible and digestible. You don't have to be a really smart person to read these books, which is so great for me. It's just so nice and simple to just open up the book and be able to fly through the pages without having to think too hard. With Words of Radiance, there is over 1,300 pages in the copy that I have, and there was only one single chapter that I didn't vibe with. This book is just so compelling. The characters are really hitting their strides. Everything they set up in book 1 is just taken to that next level. The pacing is still quick, even though it's such a large book. You don't feel like any of the chapters are a waste of space, except for that one I was talking about before. And you just have so many characters you want to cheer for. You just really want them to win. You want good things to happen for them, but they might not just yet. There's some fights in this book, a really epic duel. There's people like learning their powers and their abilities and working through emotional traumas. And there's just so many good things going on with plot, with character development that you have to check out this series. And if you haven't already, I really just don't know what you're doing. So coming in at number one of my favorite books of all time, we have Wrath by John Gwynne, the conclusion to The Faithful and the Fallen. Book 404, and just one epic book. If you haven't heard about John Gwynne, what he does is he writes epic battles, super likable characters that you just want to cheer for and you just want to be one of their comrades. Really fun, well paced out plots where there's action constantly happening and there's massive fights for good versus evil. He writes characters you love and characters you hate. He gives you POVs on both sides and he makes you love the guys you're supposed to love and to hate and despise the guys you're supposed to hate and despise. And Wrath is the perfect conclusion to his series, The Faithful and the Fallen. It's the classic good versus evil, the child of prophecy taking on the forces of evil. And there's just two massive battles in this book that I will never forget, because the way John is able to describe it, it feels like a movie in your mind. It's just everything you love of classic fantasy. We get a medieval Europe. We get ancient giants that are kind of like the elves of the land, that are really connected to the land and the magic. We get an animal companion that's basically a direwolf. We get some really cruel twists throughout the books. And we just get to live the world of the Banished Lands and see how Corbin and his band of just such likable companions is able to take down this dark force. If you love fantasy, you have to check out John Gwynne. He's just one of the best in the genre. Thank you so much for checking this video out. Please put down below your favorite books of all time so I can read them and check them out as well. Please like this video, subscribe for more, and comment down below what sort of videos you want to be seeing.